Good morning, Big Bethel. Good morning. It is an honor and a pleasure to be here, Pastor Jay. Thank you for allowing me the privilege to speak to the backbone of Atlanta. It was over 50 years before Ebenezer Baptist Church, pastored by my great-great-grandfather, Reverend A.D. Williams, and Wheat Street Baptist Church joined the ranks here on Auburn Avenue. Big Bethel was here long before, got it started. Thank you for your service. First, giving honor and praise and thanks to the Almighty, from whom all life and blessings flow. I feel right at home also today because I'm in the presence of the AKAs. My aunt, Coretta Scott King, was an AKA. Her daughter, Dr. Bernice King, is an AKA. My mother, Christine King Farris, was an AKA. Her daughter, my sister, Dr. Angela Farris Watkins, is an AKA, a member of the New Lambda Omega chapter. She's one of the 900. So it's indeed an honor and a pleasure to be here. I see an AKA who's here, but since she's more like family than friend, I'm going to claim her as being here to support me here today. Alice Eason, please stand and just greet the people. She's also a member of Ebenezer Baptist Church. And then last but not least, I'm honored to be here also because this is the home of two people that are very important to my family. You all know how hard my aunt, Coretta, and my mother worked to establish the King Center down the street. But there would be no King Center down the street if it were not for Jesse and Azira Hill. Tomorrow we uplift a great legacy of a great American, my uncle, Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr. But based on the fact that in 2024, America re-elected a man that America fully understood that when he pledged to make America great again, he meant that America should return to the autocracy days of racism, when the color of one's skin determined whether you were human or subhuman. To the autocracy days of religious intolerance, when people of the Jewish faith had to change their Jewish-sounding surname to avoid oppression. To the autocracy days of gender discrimination, when a woman couldn't even open a bank account without a man's permission. And to the autocracy days of ethnic discrimination, when America, like Hitler's Germany, had its own concentration camps during World War II. But instead of imprisoning people of the Jewish faith, America's concentration camps imprisoned legal American citizens simply because of their Japanese ethnicity. And based on the fact that since being sworn in as president 1 year ago today, most of the government policies Donald Trump has enacted are in fact attempting to make America autocratic again. And it's understandably creating great stress and a great loss of hope for many across America. It's causing many to raise questions about the promised land of Dr. King's great dream for America. Questions like, Does the promised land really exist? If so, when will America finally reach the promised land? Is it even possible for America to reach the promised land? We're all familiar with Dr. King's optimistic vision that American blacks and the rest of America would indeed reach the promised land. Unfortunately, like he predicted, he would not live long enough to be with us in the promised land. Because we could use his presence here today to clarify what he meant when he said we as a people will reach the promised land. And so for the time we have together today, and it'll be a short time because we've already had the sermon from the future Secretary of State. So for that brief time, I would like us to focus on the promised land of Martin Luther King Jr.'s dream for America. And before we truly can appreciate what Dr. King meant when he said we as a people will reach the promised land, we must first make sure we understand what the promised land is and what the promised land looks like. This is important because there is some confusion among many of us about Dr. King's promised land. For instance, in Dr. King's promised land, equal justice for all does not automatically happen. Poverty does not automatically disappear. In Dr. King's promised land, people can be homeless. And in Dr. King's promised land, unfortunately, people still might not be able to afford the health care that they need. The place where equal justice for all automatically happens, where poverty and homelessness don't exist, and where health care is affordable for all who need it, is not Dr. King's promised land. That place is called Dr. King's beloved community. I think some of us are confusing Dr. King's promised land with Dr. King's beloved community. In Dr. King's beloved community, it's not possible for Donald Trump running on a white nationalist platform ever to be elected president. In Dr. King's promised land, Donald Trump running as a white nationalist was in fact elected president. When God told Moses to lead the Jews to the promised land, he didn't say that Solomon's great temple would already be built and waiting for them to arrive for worship. It was just the opposite. When the Jews first reached the promised land, the first thing Joshua had to do was lead the people in conquering and tearing down the walls of Jericho. Yes, God revealed to Moses that the promised land was indeed filled with great amounts of milk and honey. But the great amounts of milk and honey had to be produced by the labor of the people that would live in the promised land. God never promised that the great amounts of milk and honey would produce themselves. No, the promised land was a place where when Jews arrived, the first thing that had to be done was the labor in conquering and destroying what existed in the promised land before they arrived. The promised land of the Bible was simply a place where Jews would not be considered slaves because of the God they worship, a place where they would have the freedom to determine the fate of their life. Dr. King's promised land in America is a place where no one would be legally considered an inferior subhuman species based on the color of their skin. In Dr. King's promised land, American blacks would have the legal tools needed to tear down the Jericho walls of racism and discrimination. They would be able to use the power of the promised land to build up hope, equality, and love in the promised land. That's what the promised land of Martin Luther King Jr. is. That's all it is. Dr. King's promised land is not Dr. King's beloved community, but Dr. King's promised land is the place where you have the tools to create Dr. King's beloved community. The Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965 parted the waters of legal racism, legal religious discrimination, and legal homophobia, creating the pathway to where we are today. A place where racial discrimination is illegal, a place where religious discrimination is illegal, a place where sexual orientation discrimination is illegal. A place, my friends, that I declare to you today is Dr. King's promised land. I don't declare today that we have arrived at a place where we no longer need to worry about racism and discrimination, because that would be Dr. King's beloved community. But before American blacks reached the promised land we're in today, it was legally justified and religiously blessed to inflict racism and discrimination on all American blacks. Thanks to the civil rights movement leading American blacks to the promised land, in 2026, racism is no longer legally justified, nor is discrimination of any kind religiously blessed. Also, for those of you who might have got it twisted, Dr. King meant not only American blacks would reach the promised land, he meant all of America would reach the promised land. That's why Dr. King personally made sure the three words, black, white, and race, do not appear anywhere in the 1964 Civil Rights Act and do not appear anywhere in the 1965 Voting Rights Act. The words black, white, and race are replaced with the two words majority and minority, because red, yellow, black, or white, gay or straight, faith believers or no faith believers, young or old, in Dr. King's promised land, we are now all equal in the sight of the law. That's all the promised land is, my friends. It's not the beloved community. Like the promised land of the Bible, the promised land of America still has some Jericho walls that must come tumbling down by using the power of the promised land. Dr. King's promised land is a place where all people, regardless of race, ethnicity, gender, religion, no religion, sexual orientation, or age, are equal and entitled to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So the important question today, Big Bethel, is not when will we get to the promised land, because we're in the promised land. The very important question we all need to be asking today is, how do we use the power of Dr. King's promised land to both remain in the promised land and to create Dr. King's beloved community? Three most powerful tools in the promised land that we live in today is: one, the right of every American citizen to vote; two, the right of every American citizen to protest; and three, the right of every American citizen to share their economic resources. Two of the tools, the right to vote and the right to protest, are under constant threat of being taken away by President Trump and other people who claim to want to make America great again. In other words, President Trump and his MAGA crowd are doing things every day in an attempt to evict America from Dr. King's promised land of democracy so that they can move America back to President Trump's Make America Again land of 1950s autocracy. Unfortunately, though, many of us who claim to want to keep the American greatness that the civil rights movement created in America are doing things to help President Trump's goal of making American democracy American autocracy again. Americans are in danger of losing the right to protest. And if we do, it will be because Americans are not protesting the way Martin Luther King Jr. taught America to protest, the Kingian nonviolent way. Remember, the book of Joshua chapter 6 informs us that God told Joshua to march nonviolently around Jericho without ever using force or even shouting a war cry. And the walls of Jericho would and did come tumbling down. Not protesting the Kingian nonviolent way keeps President Trump and his MAGA autocrats, gives them the leverage they need to make protesting illegal. Since 2017, 20 red state legislatures have passed 36 laws that have either penalized or attempted to outlaw all protesting. They have been successful because protesters are ignoring the core guiding principle of Kingian nonviolent protesting, which is voluntary conversion, not compulsion or arm twisting, any physical attack, destruction of property, loss of freedom to speak, or imprisonment caused by a Kingian nonviolent protest only happens to the protester as a demonstration of the protester's commitment to the protest cause. None of these things should ever happen to the people who are the target of the protest or the institution that is the target of the protest. Weeks ago in Minneapolis, we saw a female American citizen engaged in lawful protest get murdered by an ICE federal agent. That rogue ICE agent will get away with murdering Renee Good because as cheerful as she acted towards the ICE agent, even saying to him, "Dude, I'm not mad at you." But when she attempted to drive away, and make no mistake about it, Renee Good was not trying to use her vehicle as a weapon to run over that ICE agent. She was definitely attempting to leave the scene. But by attempting to leave the scene, after ICE agents were attempting to remove her from her car, was a form of resistance, which is technically a violation of nonviolent protesting. Now, for some of you, what I just said might sound wrong. And it sounds wrong to you because history does the disservice of only showing civil rights protest demonstrations. History rarely shows the strategic planning and mass meetings that Dr. King always engaged in before every protest he led. Dr. King had a personal golden rule of never leading or participating in a protest that his organization, SCLC, had no role in the pre-planning of. Never would Dr. King have sent out a tweet saying, "Meet me at City Hall in 2 hours for a protest." Because Dr. King knew he had no way of choosing the people who should and should not protest. And he also knew he would have no way of controlling the crowd of people who did show up to protest. However, he would have sent out a tweet that said, "Meet me in 2 hours to plan for a future protest at City Hall." And the one time he did not follow his golden rule, it cost Dr. King his life. It's true Dr. King initially went to Memphis to join a protest over the mistreatment of Memphis sanitation workers. That protest ended up being a gathering of violent looting and destruction of property. So he returned to Memphis a few weeks later for a second protest march, in his mind to atone for the violence he inadvertently participated in, because he inadvertently became part of a violent crowd because he had not participated in any of the pre-planning for the march. He had just shown up as an invited participant and speaker. Had he not had to return and atone for participating in a protest that turned violent because he did not do the proper pre-planning, he might still be with us today. No pre-planning is what killed the great Black Lives Matter movement. They had a habit of sending out tweets. Show up for this great cause. Let's protest this great and right cause. But that was the problem. And we saw it, unfortunately, too late. Most Black Lives Matter protests ended up devolving in some type of either destruction of property or looting. Now, we have now discovered, and they've got this guy on film, there was a guy draped in black, like ICE agents, you couldn't see his face. And he'd show up at every Black Lives Matter protest, and just start looting and starting destruction and messing with the crowd. Well, they finally caught him, and he admitted, he's a white individual, and he admitted that he was doing it because he knew he could. There was no organization. Somebody mentioned, the Secretary of State mentioned earlier, a guy by the name of James Orange. James Orange was, let me say, non-violently the man that would make sure that a guy who showed up, like that showed up at Black Lives Matter movements, would never be able to do what he did. There were protest marshals that James Orange, headed up. The planning. The mass meetings were to decide if you had the temperament to do what you needed to do. I'm not saying that, Renee Good was wrong because she didn't want to get arrested, because they say she had just dropped off her kid that morning, and so I'm sure she wanted to be available in the afternoon, Pastor Jay, to pick up her kid. You don't have to get arrested in order to, there are many types of protests. But if you engage, like don't believe the hype that we're hearing now in the media. Some are trying to justify what happened to her. Well, she was impeding. And if you impede, it's against the law. They can do what they want. My friends, that's all we did in the civil rights movement was impede. That's all we did was impede. The difference is Rosa Parks didn't try to get up and leave when the police showed up. Those college students in the lunch counters didn't get up and try to leave when the police showed up. They willingly allowed themselves to be arrested. That's the point. I'm so committed to my cause and so against what you are doing, I'm willing to put my life, my body on the line. The other problem with Renee Good is she didn't plan. There was no plan, right? So probably another reason why she wouldn't have wanted to get arrested and tried to leave is because, what good is that? I'm just one person and they arrest me. What does that do, right? But in the days of the 1960s, because of the planning, when they arrested Renee Good, there would be somebody right behind her that pulled up. And that would keep happening. You might wonder why politicians and celebrities are so eager to get arrested. Well, it's because generally, if you don't commit an act of violence, they arrest you, they take your name and say, hey, we'll call you, but they never call you. And you know why that is? Because during the civil rights movement, governments figured out this is a can't-win situation. When they were arresting protesters, first off, the only person who would agree to pay bail was Dr. King. Other people would show up and say, no, I'm not paying bail. I want my day in court. Raise your hand if you've heard of Rickwood Stadium in Birmingham, Alabama. Anybody heard of Rickwood Stadium? Rickwood Stadium is where the Negro Leagues played, and the Major League has been kind of uplifting them. But for me, Rickwood Stadium is a place of freedom, because Rickwood Stadium was the place that they had to send all of the Birmingham protesters that they locked up, because the jails were full. And people were like, I don't want to pay bail. I'm here for a reason. I want my day in court. Well, one, the court administrators and the judges are like, oh my God, I already got dockets that are loaded, and you want to fill my docket with all of these people who've committed no acts of violence, and we're going to end up letting them go anyway. Why even do that? The jailers are talking about, hey, I've got legitimate people I need to lock up, but it's full of nonviolent protesters. The prosecutors don't really want to take you to court, because if you're a nonviolent protester, you get what police get, that qualified immunity, which is code for if you think somebody's about to kill you, you can kill them. that's in your mind? Well, if you're a nonviolent protester and they're trying to protest you, because remember, the Constitution gives us the right to protest. So in order to really successfully prosecute you, they got to prove what's in your mind, right? Were you impeding because you just were politically not agreeing, or were you impeding because you meant to do harm, because you were trying to disrupt, because you were trying to make problems? They have to prove that. So since the civil rights movement, if you're a nonviolent protester, yeah, they'll arrest you, but it's like a revolving door. They let you go, unless you commit an act of violence. All protesting now has to be strategic and nonviolent, like Dr. King's example, because President Trump and MAGA Republican state legislatures across America are looking for any instance of violence caused by protesting to justify outlawing all protesting. Secondly, we must not only physically protest nonviolently, we must also verbally protest nonviolently. Realizing that words can escalate a protest crowd to commit physical violence, like Donald Trump's words incited a crowd to commit the violent invasion of Capitol Hill on January 6th, Dr. King would not allow anyone participating in any protest he led to display a protest sign or speak words that communicated anything hateful or violent, such as Bull Connor is evil, go to hell George Wallace, or death to the Ku Klux Klan. On the contrary, Dr. King was heard to say many times, "Let us pray for our sick white brethren," which could evoke compassion and nonviolence towards his opponent, as opposed to "let us pray for our hateful white brethren," which would have been true, but could have evoked negativity and retaliation towards his opponents. The sentiment behind Minneapolis' mayor telling ICE to get the F out of his city is totally understandable. But the problem is not only are the words "get the F out" violent words of confrontation that encourage a violent verbal response, the next day Minneapolis protesters showed up with signs that read, "Get the F out." Words that increase the amount of violent tension already in the protest movement, encouraging ICE to respond with equal verbal and physical violence, as opposed to signs that simply read, "Leave our city," or "Please leave our city," are nonviolent words that do not increase the amount of violent tension in the protest environment. Nonviolent words and nonviolent actions keep the focus on the merits of the protest cause and the wrongness of what ICE is doing. Like Renee Good has established, but if you notice, they're trying to use that loophole that she was trying to use her vehicle as a weapon. Now, anybody who looks at that film, you saw the woman turning her wheel. You saw her. She was trying to leave. But that's why I said technically, because you can't engage like that. You have to be willing, and it's okay if you don't want to do that. I'm just suggesting that if she didn't want to be arrested, that's fine. You don't have to be arrested, but don't put yourself in a place where they're going to come at you, and then you try to leave because they turn that on us, like they're turning it on us. She was breaking the law, right? So please, remember that. Nonviolent words and nonviolent actions, as I said, keep the merits on the protest cause. But like with the protest tool, there are things that we're doing to help President Trump and MAGA diminish our right to vote. The second tool the Promised Land enables us to use. When it comes to exercising our right to vote, unfortunately, we generally fall into three categories. The first one is some of us only vote when a president, governor, or mayor that we support is on the ballot with opposition. If those same politicians are running unopposed, we don't show up to vote. The second category is some of us will vote in every election, but because we don't take the time to properly inform ourselves about the issues and the candidates on the ballot, we end up blank voting most of the ballot because we figure it's better not to make a choice rather than to vote for the wrong person or the wrong issue. There's no excuse for that. Blank voting is a no vote or a lack of a vote. And there's no excuse for it. The AJC prints out the ballot weeks in advance for what's on it. There are plenty of groups that can tell you to make sure you vote for Secretary of State Judge Penny Reynolds. I mean, there are many resources for you to find out what's on the ballot and how you should vote. And the third category is because some of us live in an election district where we are either a racial or a political party minority, we make the mistake of thinking our vote won't count. MAGA politicians have taken note of our voting patterns, particularly categories 1 and 3, and they have acted accordingly. Last year, something I'm sure that if this happens after she's elected Secretary of State, I'm sure probably won't happen, and if it does, I'll still be able to sleep at night because I know that she did the right thing. But our current Secretary of State last year removed over 400,000 registered voters from the list of eligible voters. He was able to legally do this because Georgia has a law that says if you don't vote, you can be removed from voter rolls. In other words, our inconsistent or lack of voting is being used now to deny us the right to vote. Now, technically, this is a violation of a person's constitutional rights because putting aside the fact that I encourage every citizen to vote in every election and to vote for or against everything listed on the election ballot, it's also a citizen's right to decide not to vote. You have that right. I think it's a crazy right for you to exercise, but you have that right to say, I don't want to vote. Now, Georgia claims that this law is to prevent voter fraud. Georgia's lying. Okay? Because first off, in Georgia, there's only 2 IDs that you can use to vote. That's a Georgia state license or a Georgia state ID. And you can't get either one of those without producing a birth certificate. Okay? This is not the old days, Pastor Jay, when somebody could have showed up with a letter from you saying, this is John Smith and he's a member of my church. Or could have shown up with a utility bill, a check stub, okay? A work ID. No, the only way you can vote in Georgia now is that you have to have a Georgia driver's license or a Georgia state ID. And the only way you can get those is that you produce a birth certificate, whether you were born here or not. If you weren't born here, you got to go back to the state where you were born and get a birth certificate. So it's virtually impossible to commit voter fraud in Georgia. Right? And it's an easy fix if you want to clear. So who cares if somebody's on the rolls and they move to another state? Their name is on there, but unless they show up, unless somebody shows up with their ID, they can't vote. Right? And if you want to clear out the dead people, that's an easy fix because you can't die anywhere in Georgia with it not being documented. You can't. So all the Secretary of State has to say is to tell all Georgia's coroners, hey, send me a report once a month of who died in your county so I can remove the dead people from the rolls. Those are the only people who should be removed. This law is meant to suppress the vote of people who don't vote MAGA, Republican. So those of you who don't vote MAGA Republican must not only make sure we vote in every election, we must also realize that elections directly make the elections that directly make a difference in our lives are not the elections for president, Congress, or the U.S. Senate. The most important elections to you and I that have a direct and immediate impact on our lives are elections for governor, secretary of state, the state legislature, the state senate, for state judges, state prosecutors, state sheriffs, for county and city officials, and for your local school board. Also, now that we're in the promised land, the time is over for voting for people that look like you do. Or for voting for people who are members of your same political party. In the promised land, we should only vote for people who think like we do. This is especially true for those who normally vote for Democrats but live in red Republican election districts. You don't have to look like I do in order to think that people of all races should be treated equally. You don't have to look like I do to think a woman should have the right to choose what happens within her body. And for those Democrats who live in Republican election districts, not every Republican thinks like Donald Trump, which means you are not off the hook. Your vote can count. If there's a Republican running for the state legislature, or the county commission, or city council, or school board in your election district who might not look or think like you do on every issue, but is not a Trump MAGA Republican, you should determine if this is a Republican candidate that you can find some common thinking on fundamental issues like a woman should have the freedom of choice, or that America's true racial history should be taught in our schools. If you can find that type of common ground, it's your duty to cross over and vote in the Republican primary. You will be doing your part to help defeat a MAGA Republican while at the same time helping to elect a better thinking Republican. Remember, you will still have a chance to vote for a Democrat in the general election. And last but not least, we must do a job of using the third tool in the promised land, use of our economic resources. I think many of us make the mistake of thinking that it takes giving a lot of money to have influence on a politician or to have an impact on an issue of the day. Nothing could be further than the truth. There's an idea floating around right now in Washington, D.C. It's growing day by day, and it's a belief that small money donations in politics are a problem. Let me repeat that. Many are beginning to complain that small money donations, which are donations that are $200 or less, are becoming a problem in politics. Well, who it's becoming a problem for is big money donors. Because, they're thinking back to 2006 when there were a total of just 5 million individual small money donations, with the average donation being about $292 in 2006. By 2020, though, there were 195 million individual small money donations, with the average dropping to $59.70. In 2016, Donald Trump's campaign for president spent $325 million to win. Over 200 million of that 300 million came from individuals who gave him $200 or less. And keep in mind, these $200 contributions were never given in the $200 lump sum. It was done by monthly donations of $5, $10, $15, $20. Big money donors are complaining because they're beginning to lose their money advantage in electing the candidates of their choice. In 2016, small dollar donations to all candidates totaled $1 billion. By 2020, that total had grown to $4 billion. Unfortunately, though, only national politicians like Donald Trump, Bernie Sanders, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, AOC, or Marjorie Taylor Greene are the only ones benefiting from small dollar donations. We must start giving small dollar donations to our state and local officials who think like we do. No donation is too small, especially if you can give that same amount more than once. A one-time donation of $5 or giving $5 a month can make a difference, even more so if you can influence everyone you know to do the same. It's strength in numbers, people. It's strength in numbers. Aside from the financial impact your $5 or $10 can have on campaign resources, research, studies, and technology have greatly increased the influence small donors have on politicians. Studies have alerted politicians to the fact that it's the small donor that's most likely a person who has and will vote for you again, as opposed to the big money donor who might not even be eligible to vote for you because he doesn't live or he or she don't live in your election district, right? And because they are big money donors, they might be contributing an equal amount to your opponent to hedge their bets. AI technologies are enabling politicians to better identify and understand what their small donors expect. For instance, in the very near future, when someone suggests to you, like they do now, call your city council person, call your state representative, and tell them how you feel about an issue. Now, you might be thinking, if I do that, I won't even get a chance to talk to the politician. But that's changing. You don't need to talk to the politician. Because AI now, when you leave your name, AI now is like, hey, that person who just called in and said do X, this is the person that's giving you $5 a month. Okay? As opposed to that person who gave you $500, and like I said, he can't vote for you and might have given $500 to your opponent. If we properly use the three tools the Promised Land has given us, the right to nonviolently protest, the right to vote, the right to share our economic resources, we can and will create Dr. King's beloved community. So, I imagine now, as I'm preparing to take my seat, some of you are saying, Isaac, we believe you when you say we're in the Promised Land. But how long will the Promised Land look like this? Well, to that answer, I'm reminded of a story my pastor, Reverend Raphael Gamaliel Warnock, tells about the time that he was a very young child. He visited his grandmother, who lived on a farm in rural Georgia. And while playing outside, he came across a snake, and it scared him. So he ran and told his grandmother, who picked up an axe and came and chopped the snake's head off. Now, after she chopped the snake's head off, Reverend Warnock says that's when he really got scared. He was more scared then than when he first saw the snake. And what scared him was because the snake, after the snake's head was chopped off, the rest of the snake's body began to shake violently. Reverend Warnock, being the young child he was, thought the snake was about to retaliate and kill he and his grandmother. He didn't realize that the violent shaking was death taking hold of the snake. Big Bethel, that's where we are. That's where it's taking place in the Promised Land. Donald Trump and his MAGA followers represent death taking hold of America's racism and autocracy like it has never taken hold before. Big Bethel, no matter how hard President Trump tries, he can't make America great again. He can't. Because in 10 years, Big Bethel, America will no longer have a racial majority, white or black. President Trump can keep the border closed to all people of color and only let in white Europeans or white South Africans who are lying about being discriminated in South Africa. It won't matter. It's too late. Because since over 10 years ago in 2014, there are now every year in America more babies of color born than white babies. Since 2015, students of color now outnumber all students in America's public schools. Since 2018, the majority of all Americans 15 years and younger are people of color. And this year, Big Bethel, this year, 2026, people of color will become the majority of all Americans 40 and under. There's no stopping it. There's no turning back. This year, America turns 250 years old. And just like America claimed to be a democracy for 250 years, but did not actually become a true democracy until the 1964 Civil Rights Act and the 1965 Voting Rights Act, America has been claiming to be a great melting pot, pluribus unum, out of many one. Well, that's another American fiction that's about to become reality. The head of America's racial domination snake has been chopped off. Donald Trump and MAGA represent the body of the autocracy snake shaken violently while dying. So for those of you who are asking how long the promised land will be like this, I say not long. Because this year in 2026, if we turn out to vote, and if we vote for the right people, we can speed up the death of the dying snake. But if we don't turn out and we don't vote right, how long? Not long, because Donald Trump is a lame duck that will not be on the 2028 ballot. But if a miracle occurs and he is on the 2028 ballot, how long? Not long, because unto us a child was born and a son given, and the government will rest on his shoulders. He shall be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, and Prince of Peace. How long? Not long, because our God sits high, but he looks low. How long? Not long, because they that wait upon the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up on wings as eagles. They shall run and not be weary. They shall walk and not faint. How long? Not long, because truth forever on the scaffold, wrong forever on the throne. Yet the scaffold sways the future beyond the the dim unknown stands God within the shadow, watching above his own. God bless you and God keep you.